All right. So, hi guys. I hope you're doing okay. Again, I hope to see you at school as soon as we can. But today we are going to be looking at slides 22 all the way through slides 26. As always, your notes are your notes, so you can write down what you feel is important on the slides. You can pause this video, write down things that I might say that you feel are important as well. But we are going to be looking at slides 22 through 26 today. So the last time, or in the last video, we talked about Christianity and how Christianity had started to spread and the Roman government persecuted the Christians. And then there was a guy named Constantine. He had just come on the scene, and he also was persecuting Christians. But there will be a change with Constantine, and that's where we will pick up with today. So in 312 AD, Constantine will be in the middle of a battle fighting for the leadership of Rome. So in the midst of this fighting, Constantine will start to pray for help. And he will later report that he saw a Christian cross in the sky along with the words, "In this sign you will conquer," meaning that the cross would be his symbol and that if he fought in the name of the cross, then he would end up victorious. So what Constantine did is he ordered all of his soldiers to put the cross on their shields and their battle flags. And Constantine and his troops did end up winning the battle. So the victorious Constantine immediately ended the persecution of Christians. He'll also pass the Edict of Milan, Edict, Edict, and it is kind of a statement, a law almost, but it's more like just, hey, this is information, the edict. So in the Edict of Milan, he will actually make Christianity one of the empire's legal religions. Up to this point, it had been illegal to identify as a Christian, and he will also return property to those people that had their property seized during the persecutions back when Christianity was still illegal. Constantine will also do things like build churches. He'll put Christian symbols on the Roman coins, and he'll make Sunday a holy day of rest and worship. But Rome's first Christian emperor will also delay his own baptism, which was a symbol of his formal conversion, until the very end of his life. So Constantine was a fierce and very successful warrior, and he also will be a very serious student of his new religion. He'll end up writing a special prayer for his troops and travel with a movable chapel in a tent. He will decree the building of many Christian churches in the Roman Empire, and he'll establish Constantinople, Constantinople was a city. It's now modern day Istanbul, Turkey, and he'll make Constantinople the new capital of Rome. Constantinople will also be a center of Christianity for the next 1,000 years. And when Constantine does die, he will be buried in Constantinople's Church of the Apostles in the year 337 AD. And around Constantine's tomb, there will be memorials of the 12 apostles. And Constantine will actually consider himself to be Jesus's 13th apostle because of his devotion to this religion. Well, in 380, Emperor Theodosius, so this was almost 60 years after, or 50 years after Constantine has died, and Emperor Theodosius will declare Christianity as Rome's official religion. 11 years after Christianity is declared the official religion, the same emperor, Emperor Theodosius, will close down all of the pagan temples. So all of the temples to Jupiter, Apollo, they will now all be closed down. And he will decree that all the people that Rome ruled over would practice the religion that had started after the death of Jesus. So they were going to start worshiping and as Christians. So the practice of Christianity, though, in Rome will take on a very common structure. priests and deacons will obey bishops, which were local church leaders. In the Roman Catholic tradition, they say that the very first bishop was Peter. Peter was one of Jesus's disciples who would later on to kind of go on and found the church, what our idea of the church. And later on, Rome's bishop will actually become the most important bishop in the world. He'll actually be given a special title. He'll be known as the Pope. And this will be the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church that we still have around today. And Catholic actually means universal. So it is kind of a universal, what the Catholics do in one area is kind of the same as they would do in another area, essentially is what that means. But some very early Christian writers will develop what is known as a creed, which is simply a statement of beliefs. So this creed, this statement of beliefs, includes things about a belief in the Trinity, which is this idea of three divine persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all living in the same God. Another early religious leader wrote about this idea that God was present everywhere. And the church also will develop these sacraments, which are these religious rituals like baptism and communion based on the events in the life of Jesus. So baptism represents that Jesus was baptized. He wanted to be baptized. It symbolized like a new life. And then also communion, it deals with drinking like wine, or sometimes it's grape juice in more modern day settings, as well as taking unleavened bread. It's kind of a symbolic of the Passover, but also symbolic of the last meal Jesus had with his disciples before he was crucified, because that last meal was the Passover meal. So that's why there is that correlation there. So to live the ideal Christian life and celebrate these sacraments together, Christian men and women would end up forming communities, and these communities became known as monasteries. And as the church grew, men would start to enter higher orders of the church, and they would become bishops, they might become priests, or they might become deacons. And Christianity will change from being a very small group of people to being a very powerful and even kind of wealthy religion. So Roman armies are going to, transitioning from this idea of Christianity and into back more of Rome's in general's history, and kind of, we're actually going to start to look at their decline now. But Roman armies are going to spend a lot of time fighting people that want to enter the empire. Some of the nomads, if you remember, a nomad is somebody who doesn't have a home. They're like our early homeless people. But some of the nomads want the protection of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire offered a lot of protection, and these nomads didn't have it. Other people just wanted to take over the land in Rome. They had really good land, so they wanted it. And so these people will end up disrupting trade, and they'll actually take a lot of the valuable goods. So let me give you a bit of background about one of these groups of people. So they were known as the Goths, Goths, Goths. And they are going to be Germanic peoples that live in both the north and the east of what is known as the Western Roman Empire. And we'll get into the Eastern and Western Roman Empire in a second, but they basically live in the north part and the eastern part of those areas. Well, in AD 375, there will be a fierce Asian people that are called the Huns. And the Huns will come in and they will invade the Goths' territory. And the Goths, again, living in Rome, so the Huns have now come into Rome. The Huns will end up killing hundreds of people. They'll burn villages, they'll burn fields, and fearing for their lives, some of the Goths will end up fleeing to, deeper into the Western Roman Empire. There, they're going to ask the Romans to protect them. So fear of the Huns will call, like I said, they're going to cause the Goths to leave and ask the Romans to protect them. And the Romans will agree to let the Goths cross the river into their empire. But the Romans made the Goths surrender their weapons. That was kind of their deal. You can come in, but you have to give up your weapons. But the Goth warriors believed that their honor was tied to their weapons. If they took away their weapons, then they wouldn't have that honor anymore. So what they would do is, instead of giving up their weapons, they either paid off the Romans or they would offer to do them favors in exchange for being able to keep their weapons. The river crossing was very hard. The water was high. It was hard to get across it because of how quickly it moved as well. And the floodwaters will actually end up killing a lot of people. It'll get people like swept off their feet. They won't be able to come back up for air, and it will end up killing several Goths. Then the Goths will end up entering a camp that was guarded by Roman soldiers. So the governors of the region, the Roman governors, they were supposed to feed the people, but instead the Roman soldiers will sell the people food. But it's not good food. This is disgusting food that the Roman citizens were refusing to eat. So for example, some of the meat that they were selling came from animals that had died of disease. So the threat of disease were like seemed greater to the Roman people, so they weren't going to eat it. So instead, they were going to sell it to these Goth refugees. And in exchange of this, for food, the Goths would have to give them things for this food. And so the Romans ended up kind of taking everything that the Goths had. So the Romans are also buying Goth children and making them their slaves as well, because Goth parents thought slavery would be better than dying of starvation. So they would end up actually selling their children. And it made them very bitter, but they felt that they didn't really have much of a choice. And so anger is starting to build among the Goths because they feel they aren't being treated right. They're having to sell their children into slavery. It's horrible. And so some of the people propose going to the governors and talking about what is going on, while other people talk about getting revenge against the Romans. After all, the Goths still have their weapons. That was one of the things that they fought to keep. So after the death of Marcus Aurelius, and he's going to die in AD 180, we're going to start to see a series of problems start to weaken the empire. And these economic and political problems are going to be very difficult to solve. The empire got to be so big that they could no longer feed everybody. Some of the farmland will be destroyed by wars. Like, they've been in the Punic Wars, they've had other wars going on from people trying to invade their lands, so fields are going to be destroyed. But the biggest problem is going to be improving farm production. Even though they're going to have a lot of slaves to do the work, plantation owners will choose not to be more sensible in how they farm. So they're going to wear out the land because they aren't going to change what kind of crops they're growing, and that's going to like wear out the soil. And so harvests are not going to increase, and so food shortages are going to start popping up because they aren't going to be able to grow as much food, so people aren't going to be able to buy as much food, so people are going to starve. And these food shortages are going to cause a lot of unrest. The empire also is running very low on money at the time. Taxes are going to be super high, and in fact they're going to be so high that some people are just going to flat out refuse to pay them. And without tax money, the government couldn't do what they needed to do. They couldn't pay their army, and they couldn't buy services that were absolutely necessary. Like I said earlier, Rome was constantly at war with these nomadic people, specifically in the north and the northeast, as well as people who lived along their eastern borders. The empire would need larger armies to respond to so many threats because of how large their borders were. So what it ended up doing was hiring foreign mercenaries. A mercenary, if you don't know, is simply a soldier for hire. So they've gone out, they've hired somebody from another area to come and fight for them. Mercenaries, though, will have absolutely no loyalty to the Roman Empire. After all, they're just doing a job. They're just getting paid. If they get paid a higher amount from someone else, they're going to go fight for them instead. And they will, though, pledge their allegiance to their military leader. So having armies that were only loyal to one man created a lot of different independent military powers within the empire. Mercenaries also weren't as disciplined as Roman soldiers. Roman soldiers went through a very specific training regimen that these mercenaries didn't necessarily go through. And this lack of discipline is going to start to make the Roman army much less effective. And so because of all these problems that the army is starting to have, we're going to see a weakened defense along the empire's borders. Also, like I said, the sheer size of the Roman Empire is going to make it very, very hard not only to protect, but also to govern as well. Government officials found that it was becoming more and more difficult to obtain news about affairs in some regions of this empire. So they might live in one part, and so they might live down here in the Roman Empire. Something happens way up here. It's going to take weeks for news to travel. And it made it a lot harder for them to know if there was a problem popping up, because if there's a problem and they knew about it, they could get there and stop the problem quickly. But because of how big it is, it's going to take them forever to learn about it. Also, a lot of government officials were corrupt. They only cared about getting themselves more power. They only cared about getting themselves more money. And so all of these political problems will end up destroying the sense of citizenship that so many Romans felt was important early on in the Roman Empire. A lot of Romans now will no longer feel that sense of duty that they once did to their empire. And a lot of them are going to choose rather to get rich through business instead of serving in the government. Because of this, we're going to start to see other aspects of Roman society starting to suffer as well. The cost of education will start to increase, so poor Romans will not be able to send their kids to school anymore. In addition, distributing news across the large empire became more difficult because, again, if you're down here and you need to tell somebody up here something, that's going to take a really long time to let that news travel. So people are going to be less informed about things going on in the government and other parts of the empire. Like, they're just not going to know what's happening. So we're also going to see a lot of different emperors take control as well. During a 49-year period, from AD 235 to 284, Rome will have 20 emperors. 20 emperors in 49 years. So each emperor is really only averaging about 2 years at a time. Some of them will be military leaders who use their armies to take control. But with all of these emperors and emperors changing constantly, Roman people will have very little sense of orderly rule. It's like if your teacher was out and they're out for a long period of time and you have like a different substitute every day for 2 weeks. You're going to have a hard time remembering what it was like having somebody be like, okay, this is what we're doing every single day. Here's our routine. Like, having a different sub every day will put you into more chaos. And that's essentially what the Roman people are experiencing with all of these different emperors at such short a period of time. So in AD 284, we're going to see this emperor Diocletian take power. He's going to change the way that the army will operate by permanently placing troops along the empire's borders. He'll also start to introduce economic reform, so ways to change what's going on in the economy. And one of these ideas will do things like keep prices low on goods like bread in order to help feed the poor. Despite his reign, Diocletian doesn't bother to consult the Senate anymore. Not despite his reign, but during his reign. Misspeaking. I'm making so many of these videos today. But during his reign, Diocletian won't talk to the Senate anymore. He doesn't care about them. He's going to just be like, hey, this is my idea. This is the new law. And so he will be considered an absolute ruler, meaning that he has total power over what happens. Well, Diocletian will realize that he can't rule such a large empire on his own anymore. So in AD 285, what he's going to do is he's going to take the Roman Empire, the one Roman Empire, and split it into 2 separate pieces. And he's going to take the eastern portion for himself. He's going to choose the eastern portion because it had greater wealth, it had more trade, and it's going to have very large, very magnificent cities. And he's going to appoint this guy named Maximilian to rule the Western Empire. So these 2 men are going to rule together for 20 years. Well, in AD 306, a civil war will break out over control of the empire. There's going to be 4 military commanders that fight for control of the 2 halves of the empire. And this is where we see Constantine come on the scene. So we already talked about Constantine. We already talked about how his role in Christianity and how that came to be. So this is how he gets to his power. So Constantine was a Western Roman military commander that fought to gain control of Italy during the Civil War. So in AD 312, he'll end up entering Rome as the new empire, only of the empire's western half. So he took Maximilian's place. By AD 324, though, he will also take control of the Eastern Empire as well. So in 12 years, he's become the emperor of the entire Roman Empire again. And so he'll have reunited the empire, and he will become the sole emperor. Diocletian's idea is gone now. Well, in what was a very bold move, Constantine will shift the empire's capital from Rome to Byzantium. So Byzantium was an ancient Greek city located in what is now Turkey. It was at a crossroads between the east and the west, so it was very well placed for things like defensive maneuvers. If people were coming at them, they could stop them very quickly, but also it helped with trade as well. They were on a main road, so they could get places very easily. So Constantine will enlarge and beautify Byzantium, and this is what he's going to rename Constantinople. He named it after himself, Constantinople. He's just renaming the city, so that way he can be remembered as a great Roman leader. Today, though, as I've previously mentioned, Constantinople is now Istanbul, and again, is located in modern-day Turkey. Constantine's plan was to have each of his 3 sons rule a portion of the empire after his death. But his plan was very unwise because his sons caused a lot of problems because they were always competing with each other. They're brothers. They're going to compete. It's what siblings do. And so once their dad dies and these brothers are competing to get control of their dad's empire, we're going to see a large period of conflict follow until in 395 it'll finally be over. This, again, is about, let's say, roughly 70 years after their dad had already reunited the empire. 70 years later, we're going to see it split again into the eastern and western halves. So, again, this was the notes for slides 22 all the way through 26. We will continue looking at the decline of the Roman Empire tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be back together again soon. I hope you guys have a great day. I love you so much, and I hope you guys are staying safe through all of this. Take care of yourself. If you are sick or starting to not feel the best, I hope you get better and try to keep yourself from getting other people sick. But yes, I hope you have a great day. I'll see you later. Bye.